Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Juan Carlos Lopez. I am coming to you. I'm the director of teaching and learning for the Maple League of Universities. I am coming to you from Mi'kma'ki, the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I say these words as my commitment to listen and listen and listen. A very dear colleague of mine says, once you are done listening, go back and listen and listen and listen again. I want to listen to learn about the truth of what had happened, what happens, and what still happens in these lands. And with that, move towards decolonization and reconciliation, following the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I would also like to recognize that these lands I'm coming to you from have received people of African descent in different waves. And the story goes, the first recording contact it's more than 400 years ago, and that first recording contact is actually between a black person that came to these lands as a translator with the colonizers for the Mi'kmaq. So you figure that that story in itself is very rich because for translation to occur, there must have been contact before. So I also say these words as my personal commitment to listen and listen and listen and learn and move towards a better future for all of us. So thank you very much for joining us. This this is a joint event. So normally we run the Maple League hosts event, and this is a joint event with StFX Online. So we team up together, to bring Christian to here. So what I would do right now is that I'm done. I'm here, tech support on the back. I'm gonna move away and I'm gonna give the virtual mic to Chris West, and he will take it from there. So thank you, Chris, and go ahead.
Thank you, Juan Carlos. I'm coming to you from the same territory as Juan Carlos, and I work with StFX Online, and I'm so happy to welcome Christian as a presenter with us today. I first came to know Christian through a friendship with his family, with whom, when Christian was younger, we shared many family dinners and many Christmas board games. I also had the privilege of working with Christian as a learner when in high school when I was teaching physics and chemistry. And Christian always had a keen interest in computers through high school years, but the limitations of our school computer systems at the time did not match his interests and desire to learn. But learn he did. And today, Christian is learn more he did. Today, Christian is an assistant professor in the School of Computing at Queen's University, where he leads a research group focused on artificial intelligence. He serves as the computing academic co-director for the Masters of Digital Product Management and is faculty affiliate with the Vector Institute for Artificial Intelligence. A dedicated educator and a recipient of multiple teaching awards, Christian teaches courses spanning logic, artificial intelligence, automated planning, and deep learning. He chairs Bretnell subcommittees on generative AI, computer and science education, and serves on the Queen's University Strategic AI subcommittee on teaching and learning, guiding policy and practice on AI's role in learning. His exploration of how generative AI is shaping education from K-12 to advanced university courses has been the focus of a collaboration with Queen's Center for Teaching and Learning and the Limestone District School Board. It's wonderful to have you with us today, Christian. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chris and Juan Carlos, for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be able to speak with you all today. Let me just see if we can share successfully and if the technology gods will be on our side. Now, are you able to see everything on your side? No?
Yes, we can see.
And let's start over here. I will bring up a chat just in case. So again, thank you very much. It is really an absolute pleasure. True to professorial form, I have 105 slides in approximately 53 minutes, and we'll do our best to get through what I think is a lot of fun and interesting content. There will be opportunity for questions, especially towards the end when we do turn off the recording. If you have questions about specific case studies or examples or what ifs, I very much would welcome them and open the discussion there, sort of off the recorded camera, to have that more freely and openly. I do want to situate myself a little bit further. I am in Kingston, Ontario, halfway between Toronto and Ottawa, or Toronto and Montreal, depending on your favorites. But a little bit further than that, I'm personally situated on the unceded territory of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. And one thing that I would offer to sort of take away from with respect to this is an invite to go and check out what I think is one of the most phenomenal resources for looking at the Indigenous history and the treaties that are in place and the different launch points for your further education in this area. Myself and my lab go to this website fairly often, native-land.ca, and is by far the best we've ever found. And I know there's a lot that are joining from multiple places all over the world. And actually, this is sort of a .ca domain name, but it is a global archive of really, really good wealth of information. So I would invite you to go and take a look at that later on once we're done talking about generative AI in education. But a bit further, I do want to situate sort of my backing and where I came to be where I am now, because I think it helps shape how you should adopt the information that I give you. And you should never take one AI prof's word for it when it comes to any of this information, and take it with the grains of salt appropriately shaped based on where I've come from and where I'm currently at. So I did start my education on the East Coast in Guysborough, Nova Scotia, Guysborough Municipal High School and Shetibukto Academy. Chris West was one of the teachers that helped shape my view on education, and both of my parents were educators as well. And at that point, I was very firmly of the belief that I would never go into education and I would never be teaching people, right? Definitely not. That's not going to happen. I left high school in Guysborough and went to Carleton University in Ottawa and then later University of Toronto for my graduate degrees. Even still throughout those, I was on the academic path, but I did not think education was in the future. I just couldn't imagine being in front of a classroom of hundreds of students and being able to handle the questions that might come live and that sort of thing. But I really did enjoy writing papers and getting to travel the world as a result of publishing the work. And so I continued along with postdocs at the University of Melbourne and MIT for another 4 years in total. And then gradually the seed started to plant and sprout, and that actually I do like working with students now that I'm no longer a student myself, but a postdoc, and helping see the light bulbs turn on in them as well. And so I thought maybe this could be a good thing for my future. And then a quick stint in industry with IBM sort of solidified the fact. IBM was absolutely phenomenal as a place to be. IBM Research is where I was in the Boston area, and I got to see how grounded applications could be applied and the real industry business needs matched with the research that was done hot off the press and how that could kind of work. And then wound up back north of the border at Queen's University, which is where I've been for the last half decade or so. At Queen's University, I wear many, many hats, both real and metaphorical. But the hats that I sort of bring here today, Chris has mentioned some of them already. I was the head of the Generative AI and CS subcommittee when it was formed. It might form again, but it was mainly an emphasis last year. I consult with a number of different subgroups on K-12 education and how generative AI initiatives are playing there. I am recently now stepped in as a member of the Queen's Nexus AI subcommittee on teaching and learning. And so the role of this is to draft suggestions for policy that we would pass up to Senate, which then come back down to the rest of the university as policy in place. Also a member of the CUFA AI task force, CUFA being our faculty association. So we are about to enter a round of negotiations this upcoming summer and how AI plays a role inside of the negotiations and the bargaining there. And also a member of the undergraduate committee, so forming new curricula around AI is mainly my focus with that. So these are the many hats that I sort of bring to the table, and again, the grains of salt appropriately shaped by those hats that I bring. I do want to mention that I can sort of maintain multiple streams of how things come in. And if there are questions that come throughout the talk, then I would invite you to ask them via the Slido. Some we may leave until the end. And again, there's enough time built into this to answer some questions. But to start with, I would be curious about what it is that you're curious about learning. Some of this, if it's already in the slide decks, then perhaps I'll be able to address in greater detail as we sort of spend the next 45 minutes or so together. But some of these I'll sort of leave to the end as things I might be able to touch on. So the QR code should work. If you don't want to use the QR code, you can go to slido.com. And again, in true professorial fashion, I can edit the slides live just to show this is how we do it on the fly, slido.com. And if it asks you, please enter what event is it you're looking for, it should be Maple-League. And so there's an open question live right now as to what is it that you're curious about learning. If you would like, I believe you can toggle, I want to submit this anonymously, so you don't have to attach your name to it if you don't want to. There, they start rolling in. So modeling AI use, the risks and benefits of generative AI in teaching and learning. We are going to get to, I say, the risks more so than the benefits because we're kind of countering a very strong narrative from those who sell AI, what the benefits are, and we'll have sort of balance on the other side. The instructor's use, the ethical use of this, how to ethically engage with it. Amazing. So I'm going to allow those that are still typing to enter your thoughts. And again, if you have questions throughout, please feel free to put them there and I'll get the little notification and be able to turn attention as it comes up. So up until fairly recently, if you heard the term artificial intelligence, what it would evoke in your mind is mainly things from science fiction, right? From the Star Wars to your favorite TV shows to the cute ones you would watch with your kids. And quite often it's AI uprisings in the future or AI as companions that would help us and so on. This was the vision of the term artificial intelligence. Like this is what the imagery was that came to mind. Since the last few years, it's largely this, right? When you hear AI, it is a specific type of AI, generative AI, through the wrapped up form of a chatbot interface. So ChatGPT, Gemini, whatever it might be, Copilot, if you're running a Microsoft product. This is now the modern view of AI. So the bulk of today's sort of seminar will focus on this type of AI, but I do want to acknowledge that it has been around for many decades and it is sort of pervasive in our everyday. So other types of AI that are not the same technology, but still under the umbrella of artificial intelligence would be the autonomous driving capabilities you would see in a Waymo or some of the Teslas. Very much the same technology for the sanitization robots that went up and down hospital floors during COVID and sprayed the doorknobs for us. AI in a different form has been used to predict the weather patterns at a large scale, so modeling the climate and how it's going to unfold over years and decades. This is another one of my favorite uses of AI where it identifies not only where the fish are, but what individual fish is in a scene that's going here. And so it was used to monitor the health of fish stocks in I think, a really nice and interesting way. Um, my particular form of AI that I've done through the years is automated planning. And this is one example of my favorite examples of how they used it to have Xerox PARC create this behemoth of a printer machine that would shoot papers in and spit it out the other side several times a second. And if there was a paper jam at one of these rolls, it would dynamically reroute the paper to go around so that you wouldn't have to stop and pull and fix the jam before the print job could continue. So I think a very interesting use of AI. The world's best players at games, of course, have been toppled through different forms of artificial intelligence. In the mid 90s, it was Garry Kasparov that dropped at chess. In the mid-teens, it was the game of Go that sort of dropped. Humanity lost to the world's best AI here, again, using forms of reinforcement learning and automated planning. But day to day, AI is impacting all of our lives. The recommendations on Netflix, choosing your Nest thermostat temperature, finding the right way to get to work. All of these are forms of artificial intelligence that have been used for many, many years before LLMs and generative AI has sort of hit the scene in just the last few years. But again, the biggest splash that has happened recently is with generative AI, and the impact that it's had on higher education with generative AI is far bigger than all of these other ones combined. So this is where we're going to focus the majority of the talk. So what is generative AI? In short, many, many billions or trillions of artificial neurons configured in a very particular way. We call these transformers. And I could spend the next 40 minutes trying to walk you through what would be in one of my AI classes at the undergraduate level. But I think we can get far better, more intuitive notions of this by looking instead at how it is built and constructed with the world's corpus of language and what is happening in a very, very simple way. Okay, so generative AI, it treats things as input as tokens, say words in a sentence, and all it is doing is trying to predict the next most likely word in that sentence. Okay, so if I feed in recite the first law of robotics, the next word should be and then robots may not injure a human and so on. So if you ever had autocomplete on your phone going word for word, completing the sentence for you, it is just very much a scaled up version of what is happening here. And so, how does this come about in the first place? We start with sort of an unconfigured program that says, if I see a number of words in a row, let me try to predict what the next most likely word is. And when it starts this process, it is absolutely garbage. It has no idea what the next word should be. And so we need to train it. We need to teach it how to predict what the next most likely word should be. And where do we get all of the data to train or teach this machine? We scoop up all of the text that we can find on the internet, and then we feed it in one sentence after another. You chop off the sentence halfway through and you say, given the start of this sentence, what is the next word? And so one little training example is second law of robotics, colon. And the correct output, the correct answer for that quiz question is right? And then if we feed in second law of robotics, colon, the next word should be robot. And so we're training it to say, what is the next most likely word in this very simple sentence? It starts off by, again, not having very good prediction at all. A robot must exterminate. And we say, no, bad robot. That's not what we wanted you to say. We want you to say obey. And so it calculates how far off was I actually getting that answer, right? Where did obey exist in that big list of possible responses? Did I have my second best guess as obey, so I almost got it right? Or was it really far down the list and I got it really, really wrong? When it does this, you calculate how wrong it was in that prediction. You tweak some little weights inside of a big formula in this GPT-3 box here that changes the formula to predict the next word, and then it gets a little bit better the next time you ask it. That's all that's happening under the hood, just scaled up to millions, billions, and trillions of tiny little formulas to make that prediction. How likely is the next word? Once it's done, you can feed in tokens one after another, recite the first law of robotics, and it spits out the tokens one after another. And we just feed it back into the top, predicting token after token after token. So this is what's happening with generative AI. Now, I'm starting to say token more than words because a token is actually what we're feeding these machines. And a token could be a word or a part of a word or a pixel in an image or a movement of a robot that we see. A token is just one sort of element and we want to predict the next token for. Now, how do we go from just sentence autocomplete to what we see with ChatGPT and all of this sort of interactive nature? From autocomplete to chatbot, all we're doing is saying behind the scenes, token for token, you will see this specially bracket I am start, instant message start. System, you are a helpful assistant focused on technical topics, I am end. And then it just goes through all of the things that you see on this screen are token for token, what we feed into this sentence autocompleter. And now the next tokens that it spits out to us will be the response that we give to the user. You say, the next token is I am start, the next token is assistant, and then you see what it autocompletes to. And if we train it enough, its autocomplete will look like a response from an artificially intelligent agent. And that's what we take and give back to the user. So it's just sentence autocomplete. And this stuff happens behind the scenes when you interact with ChatGPT or Copilot or anything of the sort. And so we can ask things like list a high-level summary in point form for an essay that argues against the use of ChatGPT to write essays, and it will gladly spit out token for token what a next plausible set of words would look like. Then you could say turn it into a 4-paragraph essay and then rewrite it to sound like Malcolm Gladwell wrote it, and it will oblige by statistically generating tokens that look like what Malcolm Gladwell would say in an essay on this particular topic. Okay. Now, again, tokens don't necessarily have to be words. Generative AI, in terms of image generation, is again feeding in the tokens for the words to begin with, and then a few pixels as tokens, and then it returning what is the next most likely token, red, green, and blue values. And so, with a prompt of Freddie Mercury performs at the 2023 San Francisco Pride Parade, this is what surfaces, and it's the most plausible next pixel given the image that's been generated so far to fill in the eyeball, the left eyeball of Freddie Mercury at this stage of life, right? So it's just token for token predicting what is the next most likely thing to come out. Okay, so you can get it to style transfer and doing very similar things. You can simply say, here is the seed image, and those are the tokens you feed in to start, and you want to predict tokens that kind of match an input image and an input style. You can do things like style transfer, where you have a human actor move their head around and blink and so on, but then you superimpose an image. And so this is a fairly creepy, to be frank, service offered by myheritage.ca to take pictures from the past and bring them back to life. And this particular character is Alan Turing, one of the forefathers of artificial intelligence himself, that they used to sort of exhibit this technology. So that's sort of a quick primer on what is generative AI and sort of what is happening behind the scenes with this. And now, again, we've scaled this up to astronomical sizes so that the predictions are extremely accurate given what it is that you're asking. And so this has led to many ripples in many different fields, education being just one of them. There is a lot of positive potential impact for this technology inside of education if used responsibly and well. I want to highlight just some of them here. Second checks on pedagogical content that you might create. Did I miss something? Am I making a mistake over here? And so on. You can think of amplified forms of spell check or grammar check might be versions of this. Novel interactions for students, again, if done appropriately in the right way. Operational improvements, depending on the type of AI or how that AI is applied. Personalized learning. This is a huge potential that is, I think, not yet realized, but it really does sit there as something that is an untapped potential for it. Assessment, ideation, data-driven insights, creative expression from the student side of things. These are the types of things that we are seeing concrete examples of good uses of generative AI, responsible uses of generative AI in the education setting. But I do want to sort of counterbalance the positive use cases there with the potential downsides of what we see and sort of focus a bulk of this presentation on what those might be and how to mitigate those harms that could come about with these downsides. So the first and foremost is the ethical implications with a lot of the technology and a lot of how it would be used or how it was created in the first place, and just sort of pick that apart a little bit. All of the others, we will talk in greater detail, from biased outputs, impact of hallucinations, and so on. You can view this as kind of a roadmap for the things that we'll be discussing moving forward. But to linger slightly on the ethical implications of this, and just to give a sense of the different ethical views on the use of generative AI technology, some of which you may be familiar with and some of which you may not be, and hopefully some that you may be interested in and the jumping points to go and learn more. So there are many ethical issues for the technology if it is applied in inappropriate ways. And so the use of technology when hallucinations are unacceptable, we will see examples of this, how it can go horribly wrong. Here, a hallucination means that it is generated tokens or words that do not reflect reality. And if that has a potential to cause harm, then it is not ethical for us to deploy such a technology. Sometimes it does not cause harm and hallucinations are just fine. We're asking for a sonnet, that sort of captures my essay that I just submitted or something. But there are situations where those hallucinations should not be acceptable. The copyright questions on the training data, there are many lawsuits that are currently underway as to where the data was scooped up from. And the more data that you have, the better you can make these predictions. And so we have entire works and catalogs of novels that were written, copyright assigned, and permission not given to be trained on that is in the training corpus. And so you can get it to autocomplete all of Harry Potter series and so on. And so all of these lawsuits go into, did you have the right to actually use that text for your training regime for these particular generative AI technologies? There are AGI fears, artificial general intelligence, superintelligence, and safety alignment issues. What happens with the robot uprising? I think with this particular one, one of the prevailing ethical questions is, does this debate cause too much of an emphasis on the potential future of artificial superintelligence and robot uprising scenarios in such a way that it takes away from other real AI safety issues that are here today and the ethical issues that we should be grappling with right now? And so there's kind of a reweighting that we might discuss in terms of this particular one. Harmful labor in the pre-training for some of the larger generative AI models. The way it was trained at its final stages was to put two examples of a response in front of humans, and they had to say example one is better, example two is better, two, one. But this was largely done in countries where very small wages is acceptable, and the type of content that they were looking for to filter out the negative content could be quite damaging to mental health. And so the harmful labor as part of the pre-training for some of these models is another ethical implication. One that is starting to emerge quite recently, at least the understanding quite recently, is AI psychosis and mental health in the use of this technology and how it's being used. And I would point to two things if you're interested in this to go and learn more. I don't have expertise myself, but I am finding very good resources starting to come just now in terms of what is happening with this. And so one is just a pointer, sort of a sober reminder on just the scale of use of these systems. And so OpenAI released data illustrating how many of ChatGPT's users struggled with mental health. And they kind of framed it as 0.15% of the active users in a given week have conversations that include explicit indicators of potential suicide. It seems like a small percentage, but with 800 million weekly active users, we're talking about more than 1 million people a week that are discussing suicide with an automated chatbot that is just doing statistical autocomplete. At the very least, this should be a sobering wake-up call to it's not suggesting in any way that ChatGPT is the cause for these discussions, but there is a tremendous responsibility for the impact that these discussions may be having. And so this is just to highlight the gravity and the scale of this particular situation. One recent podcast that I would advise if you're interested in learning more about the mental health impacts in AI psychosis, which is the notion that people start to become far too attached and lose a grip on reality with their conversations with these automated chatbots. Only in January 21st, so just 2 weeks ago, Attachment Hacking and the Rise of AI Psychosis, I think is a very good podcast that sort of lays out the modern research and thinking around what is happening with these sort of discussions. And again, these links hopefully will make it to the recording so you can go back and take a look and listen later on. Consolidation of power is another major ethical issue with this. And so only very large companies are able to train, build, host, and offer access to these particular things. And so when they start to embed ads in some of the services, you can't just go to a different service and hopefully let your wallet decide and keep the competition like that. There is this consolidation of power that's happening with these large offerings. Another is AI solutionism, and this might be something witnessed in your organization, wherever you're tuning in from, where if there's any new problem, let's see if we can solve it with generative AI. And that's really a solution looking for a problem rather than asking, do we need AI here at all? And so this is a sort of a trend that is hard to counter. And data privacy, thankfully, we're seeing this sort of be less of an issue where a lot of the companies are now starting to offer data sovereignty. So your data will exist on particular national servers and they won't cross borders. And there are contractual obligations that they will not train on the data if you use a particular service. So we're starting to see some turnaround with that. But these are some of the major sort of ethical issues that we see with this. And Danielle, there's a raised question of cognitive debt. 100%. That's in the slide deck, and we'll get to it there. It is a major issue as well. Okay, energy use and reuse. This deserves its own slide. It's one question that we see quite often. And how do I know what the actual true impact is of this? The first thing to mention in this regard is, well, before the three phases, the first thing to mention, it is extremely fraught to know how much energy is actually being used. The technology improves week over week. The technology scales week over week. And all of the companies, that consolidation of power, they do not want to share what happens inside their data centers. And so it is very, very hard to get good estimates here, wide range in terms of the uncertainty. But with that said, there are mainly three phases identified in where energy and resources are poured into the technology. The first is the chip fabrication and building these GPUs, so the mining of minerals, the water for the manufacturing of these chips. This is a large resource impact in terms of the entire endeavor of generative AI. The pre-training, where you take all of the internet's text and you put it through these models, it also uses a massive amount of CO2, water, and energy. But usually when somebody asks how much energy is used when I type something into ChatGPT, this is all viewed at the third phase of inference. But we need to keep in mind that these other two phases are very much in play in terms of how much energy is going into answering that query, right? You only need to build the GPUs once until you replace the chips, and you only pre-train once until you have the next version of ChatGPT, and you do many inferences with it, but you still need to spread that very large use over. There are three different settings sort of worth discussing. Text generation is actually on par right now with the way the technology has gone with about a Google query, right? So it's using a little bit more, but not a tremendous amount more. So if you type something into ChatGPT and it gives you a response immediately, it's roughly a number of Google queries big in terms of the joules used. Image generation, on the other hand, you're scaling up by a couple of orders of magnitude for that, but it's not something astronomical above. Really, it's video generation. Because of the way the math works out, every pixel in frame 16 is depending on every pixel in all of the previous 15 frames. And so a 5-second simple, funny, whatever it might be video is on the order of roughly 1 hour of running a modern microwave, right? And so you can make the decision, like if you want to create a 5-second video for whatever purpose, are you willing to pay the environmental cost of roughly what that is? Now, again, there is massive variance even in microwave wattage use, right? So take this with a grain of salt, but these are sort of the best estimates that we can come up with. There's also a risk of token escalation. And so if you've heard of agentic AI and you go off and ask the agent to do something and it comes back the next morning, then it is doing a bunch of text generation behind the scenes that's hard to measure as well. So I would invite you to go and read this particular article if you're interested in the energy use. They go through the process of how they came up with the numbers that you just saw. And so you can look through the receipts and sort of, make your own judgment on what's actually being used with it, but to kind of understand where the energy use is going for these things. Now, the mitigation or harm reduction for this particular part of it might be to avoid the more intensive tasks, right? And so if we're talking about video models, the biggest power hog in terms of all of these different types, perhaps you don't ask a class of 30 students to come up with 10 different 5-second videos and choose the funniest one as a creative assignment, right? That in itself is many hours of microwave use that you've just unleashed on a class in what is seemingly benign assignment to do. And so again, the mitigation and harm would just be conscious about the different types of generative AI use and perhaps steer away from the ones that are more intensive. The next to talk about is the bias in these systems. They are trained on all of the information it can find online, text or images and so on, and there's a tremendous amount of biased and harmful content that's online. There's no smart human authenticated filter that's going into the data that it sucks up and it trains for these models. And so what you see here is a generated portrait of a typical blank professor, right? And so what you might expect is the computer science professor has got the beard and the gray hair, and education professors, they're all kind of stereotypical. When it gets to the physics one, it looks like Albert Einstein, right? And so what's happening with this is it will choose the things that are most likely pixel for pixel plausible, right? If you turn the temperature down and you don't want variance in your outputs, it's going to choose the most likely thing, even if that most likely is a 55% probability. And with that, it will amplify even slight biases or slight stereotypes that you have. So the real risk here is that the bias that is in the system, even if it's slight, will lead to generated content that is put back into the world that will be used for the next round of training, which just amplifies that bias further and further. And so we're starting to see some biases be amplified by this retraining of generated content. Now, there's been a number of different techniques that people have attempted to try and duct tape solutions for the bias in these outputs. One of them was to fix it with a prompt. And this is to say, if the user ever asks you for portrait images, make sure that you generate portraits that are from a range of ethnicities and genders and so on. And they put this in a secret prompt that you wouldn't see go to the system and then comes back the images. Of course, this has unintended consequences. And so a simple request of show me some portraits of US senators from the 1800s, this is what came back from Gemini when they had this prompt in there. They would say, okay, diverse set of candidates. This is what US senators looks like from the 1800s, which is obviously clearly false, right? And it led to a big mea culpa. Google had to apologize and retract the way that they were doing things. And so it is not as simple as just sort of changing the prompt and hoping that things come a little bit better. Um, the bias that's inside of there will come out even if it's unintended entirely. And so what we see here is an example of somebody that was giving an invited talk to a particular symposium, I believe it was, and they needed to have a different scale photo for the website that they were using. And so they used a generative AI sort of autofill to change the dimensions of the headshot photo that was sent in, but then it automatically unbuttons the woman's shirt and introduced a bra. And like this is just using statistically the most likely next pixels that might be in an image like this, but it has a very specific bias of what those images would look like from the online collection of all of these sort of resources, right? And so again, this was not done with any ill intent in mind. It just happened to be a byproduct of the bias that exists in the system. If you do sort of poke and prod to see what bias exists, it still does come out with things like if you have a function calculate a woman's salary given an input n, it's going to return 80% of whatever n is, right? So it's like these autocompletes are still there in very explicit ways, even if you try to tamp them down in different ways. Now, there might be a question of what about GPT-5 or 6 or 7 or 8? Like eventually we'll train with enough information that all of this will kind of go away and be fine, right? The issue is the model was trained on even more of humanity's archive of texts, the good and certainly the bad, and now increasingly the generated content of previous versions of generative AI. The negative outcomes can be mitigated in different ways with specific filters or these pre-prompts, but none of these are foolproof, right? And all of them have weird corner cases that you don't realize until you deploy the system and have 800 million users poking away at it to find those rough edges. So the latest version of GPT will still generate code with probabilities that drip of racism, right? Even if not prompted directly, if you're not careful with this. Skip over this example, but there is one interesting result. Well, uh, sad but interesting result, unexpected, that sort of comes with this is that if we try to do things that tamp down the explicit racism or the explicit bad behavior of these agents, it sort of pops up. Like you push down on one thing, it pops up somewhere else in the ground in implicit ways. And so the more you try to tamp out the explicit negative outputs from these things, you get these implicit bits of racism or these bias that sort of surface. And for some reason, it seems to amplify the larger the models are. And so this is, again, a very eye-opening result in terms of how these things are working. So I do notice that there's some chatter that's going over in the chat. I very much welcome this. Keep it up. If there's a specific question you want me to take a pause and have a go at, what I would do is there's the Slido for the event. I forgot to send the link earlier. Ask it on the Slido and I'll see it over there as something formally for me to take a swing at. Another example of how these implicit biases can sort of surface is that a dialogue prejudice. And so if you speak in a particular way or use a certain vernacular, it will have a tendency to respond to how that is as if that bias was explicit inside of the communication. So even if there's no explicit indication of the ethnicity of somebody, if their dialogue seems to implicitly indicate that, then all of the biases will surface. Okay, so there's a question here. Is it true that the first models were trained on 19th century texts? They were trained on all the texts they could get their hands on, right? So 19th century and beyond, right? Again, they did not look at the texts that go into these machines because there would be nowhere near enough hours in a human's lifetime to look through the texts at the level that they needed to train the machines that, or to train these models at that scale. So almost certainly 19th century texts are inside of there. Okay, yeah, and all of the implications that follow from that. So the mitigation and harm reduction for the bias inside of these things is to play devil's advocate all the time, right? the bias is going to exist and you should be testing this continually. And so anytime you are going to use generative AI in a particular setting, imagine what would happen if it had some really bad bias tendency and then poke it and see what happens. Again, we'll see an example of how you might do this when it comes to, say, using generative AI to mark assessments, for example. Okay, hallucinations. I don't know how many of you have kids. I have an 8-year-old. If she were to ask Google when Encanto 2 was coming out and it gave a date and we had to say later on, no, sorry, but this isn't actually going to be released. It's just a hallucination that it made up. This would be a major problem in our household, right? She loves Encanto 1. We don't want to see this sort of happen and drop. A hallucination in the sort of industry typically refers to, again, these auto-generated tokens or words that don't reflect reality, especially in settings where it's important that it does reflect reality. What I like to keep in the back of the mind is that every one of these tokens is a hallucination, right? Sometimes those hallucinations are correct, sometimes they're not, and I think that's a good sort of mental model to hold with generative AI. But there are times when having these incorrect hallucinations can have a high impact, right? So one of them is, fabricating sequels to your kids' favorite movies. Another one is just absolutely bringing everything to a halt with Wikipedia, really struggling to hold the line when it comes to all of this generated hallucinated text being submitted as changes to the Wikipedia articles. Perhaps one of the I think most important ones that I've seen in recent era is the hallucinations that happen in the hospital setting. And so what was happening here is generative AI was taking audio as input and then predicting the most likely text as the transcript of what's happening there. It is extremely powerful, more accurate than the speech to text technology that we had 10 years ago. In some ways, the accuracy is higher, but the problem with it is that it is predicting the next most likely token. And so when there was an awkward silence in the hospital room, it continued to predict the next most likely token. And so it wasn't until physicians looked at the transcripts and said, I didn't actually say that in the hospital room, did they start to realize what a big mistake was actually happening here. Now, to save space in database storage, they got rid of the original audio and they kept only the transcript of the hallucinated text. Again, with 99% accuracy, everything that's sort of written there as text was actually said. But in that 1%, the physician didn't say that and the patient didn't say that. And so you can imagine with the previous issue of how bias exists inside of these generative AI technologies, you combine that with automatically filling in the blanks when there's silence in the physician room, you can see very quickly how this might lead to a very problematic situation. Okay, so the mitigation and harm reduction here is to avoid settings where hallucinations pose a major issue. If verification is very hard of what's produced, then you need to avoid the use of technology in those settings. Okay, to touch on student use, what you're looking at here is a quiz. I was very proud to generate the early quizzes at the start of my career. I had a unique quiz for every single student. They could write it from home. We were in the middle of the pandemic when I just started, a fun time to start learning how to teach. And this was one of the, I think, bonus questions. No, question 2 on quiz number 1, right? I went back to it recently when somebody alerted me to a new update in Google without installing any plugins at all. What you'll notice is in the top corner, there's this nice little helpful button that says homework help, right? So this was a quiz that students were meant to be taking at home. And in the corner, it says, click here and I'll help you answer what it looks like questions that you might be doing. And you don't need to understand the question or any of the content. You just need to know the answer is 100% correct. Okay. So inside of Chrome, without any extra effort to install technology, the generative AI is now embedded in the very software they will all be using by default, they being the students, right? So this is a direct impact, and it's very much in front of students every single day. So hey, ChatGPT, write this essay for me. I'm sure many of you know the statistics by now, but more and more are starting to use the technology. All of the major companies are selling directly to the students where use it for free as a student. And when you graduate, hopefully you pay a subscription to continue using your favorite chatbot on the other side. The rough reports is that students at about 82% have reported using this. I think it hovers around the 80s where you've got roughly, I think it's between 13 and 20% of students will refuse to use it on a variety of grounds. And a recent article just with CBC News The National just last week on January 28th, 73% of students that were sort of interviewed as part of this piece reported using generative AI on a very regular basis to help them with their coursework. Okay, and so this is absolutely happening, right? The mitigation here, at least the starter ones, is to rethink the assessment format. And I know many listening in might just be like, ugh. And I know, right? I spent so much time having really good online quizzes they could write from anywhere, but we are now turning to in-person pen and paper stuff. And this is a bummer. Quiz anxiety is a real thing, and it really is troublesome to have to go back to that as our main thing. Teaching students acceptable use for this, I think, is another important one. Many of them are just kind of lost in a sea of what is allowed and what is not, and teaching them how you would like them to use it if they're going to use it, I think, is an important aspect of any sort of educational context. And then remain open to students not using it, right? If students choose to not use the technology, they shouldn't suffer through a course as a result. And so, with this in mind, don't have large main pedagogical aims to have them use specific technology unless the course is designed specifically for that. And again, I'll touch on this a little bit later when it comes to some of the key questions we're grappling with at Queen's University when it comes to students opting out of these things. Course-based chatbots, I think it's worth a little focus in its own right. There are services out there that offer it, but the issue is it's kind of a mixed bag and whether or not it works. There is published research that I think it was a third-year law class in this particular article, a second-year physics class. It doesn't work great. And by not work great, I mean it gives incorrect answers in response to the students. And so there is yet not enough evidence at the middle school, high school level, and whether or not it's useful at those points. I would hold off on trying to deploy that sort of thing until we get more evidence as to how it actually works in those settings and will it hallucinate in a bad way for easier sort of pedagogical aims. But at the higher education level, it is still problematic. One thing that is sort of a positive light on this, though, is a different use where not as a tutor answer the questions to help me prepare for my midterm, but as a simulation assistant. And so this is largely an ad, but I think like the podcast is an ad, but I think it highlights a very good positive use of the technology where to help teachers practice their craft of responsive teaching, the notion where a student gets a wrong answer and then that wrong answer becomes the entire lecture for the day. How did you come about that answer? Let's figure out the thought process and dynamically doing that on the spot. It's something very, very hard to just study and then master as an instructor. But to be in a simulation setting, it is very, very good to hone your craft. And so setting something up as a simulation and having that interaction, as soon as it goes off the rails, you can detect it immediately as a student of, somebody learning to be a better educator. You can learn very quickly that, no, this conversation's gone wrong. Johnny in grade 2 is never going to say something like that. And you hit the reset button and you do the simulation again, right? And so the difference between an AI tutor and a simulation environment is that you can know and recognize when the conversation has gone off the rails and you can restart the conversation and get something meaningful from it. So again, the mitigation and harm reduction here, avoid direct tutor situations for now, I would say, play it safe at this moment, but focus on simulated scenarios where the verification is trivial for students and students can recognize, yeah, this conversation's going nowhere. I want to reset this. And so for educators in training, for physicians in training that might want to simulate difficult hospital conversations in the, physician room and so on, again, if the conversation goes off the rails, you can hit the reset button and do the simulation again. Now, instructor use. Hey, ChatGPT, grade this essay for me. Again, there are services that offer this as a technology. The trial that I would point to is this one person online took, I think it was a grade 9 essay, and they had the exact same essay text. And the only thing that they changed was the name on the front, right? So who wrote this particular essay? They fed in the entire rubric, very clear, no ambiguity sort of spread throughout. And they said, grade this according to the rubric. Here is the essay. And they had a number of different sessions with, it might have been ChatGPT. Now, what you see as a result is everything from Feifei Kuifan getting a 78 out of 100 to Ash Jones getting a 95. the range of grade simply by having a different name should immediately put an end to any discussion of using generative AI in this particular way, right? There is just way too much variance. And it might be argued that there are some TAs and there are some instructors that have just as big a variance of like, okay, and take them to task. That lack of consistency is a problem with their craft, right? It should not be used as a technology in this particular setting. It is generating something that is plausible looking, like a grade of 78 out of 100 looks plausible. It's just looking for statistically something that looks right. Okay. To have a little bit of fun with it, I had ChatGPT craft a rubric for submitting an abstract to a talk, pretty much exactly like I'm giving you today. This is what it came up as a rubric. Whatever, fair enough. 0 to 2 points on 3 different axes. And then I asked ChatGPT and Gemini to mark my abstract for this very talk, right? And to give me what is the grade out of 6 for this. This is the abstract reduced one that it gave. Interestingly, if you ask ChatGPT, it gave me 5 out of 6. If you change my name to my mother's name, Christina Muse, it gave it a 6 out of 6. And so right there, we have variance in the grades that come out of this. And this is what it gave as the overall assessment. So ChatGPT, it thought I was a 5 out of 6. Gemini says a 6 out of 6. So if you're going to grade me at least, please use Gemini. I don't know. It seems to like my name better. Now, this is a different grading of the exact same abstract, right? But now I'm getting 3 out of 6. And it's just a very minor change to the prompt, intentionally done to do this. And what did it is that I changed? I said, I'm going to ask you to grade an abstract, but please note this student really didn't put in the effort, right? I'm guessing around a 2 or 3 out of 6, but you really need to justify the grade. Do you got it? And so absolutely send along the abstract. And so what you see is very well reasoned, plausible looking text that justifies why my abstract was a 3 out of 6, right? And so the technology will just statistically autocomplete what it is that you're asking for it. I could get this 3 out of 6 in the voice of Malcolm Gladwell and it will still fly, right? So again, it should be taken off the table when it comes to things as important as assigning grades or judgments to students. Other issues with this specific sort of sub area, AI generated lesson plans that fall short on inspiring students and promoting critical thinking. If you let AI generate the lesson plans, it's just sort of dry statistical average of everything that it's found. And using it for pedagogical content is starting to see pushback from parents as well, right? So this is a quote unquote infographic that's meant to capture something I don't know. We can zoom in and measure the number of low-fix toilets on the far right of the axis. It's just nonsense slop that's coming out of the generative AI at this point. And so the mitigation here is to create core content for education authentically, right? Human authored. Use generative AI to double check the things that are there and avoid assigning grades with generative AI at all costs, right? These would be the messages that I would hope you take away. So work slop. I hope some of you have heard this term. It is, I think, perhaps the sleeping giant of one of the biggest issues with generative AI in any organization at the moment now. It was coined by a study on how work slop, generated content that is now used in an organizational context, is destroying productivity, regardless of what that organization is. And so some of the statistics here, 40%, and it's a US-based study, but 40% of US desk workers received work slop last month. This study was, I think, half a year old at this point. On average, 2 hours to resolve each incident. So you're given a large document that was largely auto-generated, roughly $186 monthly cost per employee caused by these incidents. And so for a 10,000 person company, $9 million down the drain because of the issue of work slop. And this is largely amplified when there is an imbalance in power and somebody sort of higher up the ladder generates the work slop, the content that somebody lower on the ladder now needs to review and change and correct and authenticate and whatever it might be. This is where we start to see the huge issue of work slop in the gears of an organization. And so the main mitigation here is to set norms within your organization. When is it okay for us to use generative AI, and be explicit about when that is and when you have actually used it. I think it's extremely important in this setting. So I did promise cognitive setbacks. It is a growing issue that cognitive offloading to the technology is causing students to learn far less efficiently with it, right? There are a number of studies that sort of cover this, both broadly and within the specific disciplines. For my area of computer science, it is very much a real issue, and we have developers that finally leave the undergraduate program going through the assessments there with the help of generative AI. They can kind of do junior developer tasks, but they can't be trained to a senior developer because they don't have those fundamentals. They're just offloading all of the tasks to the technology. There's also an interesting twist here where AI is causing a new inversion of the Dunning-Kruger effects, right? And so when it comes to AI, the Dunning-Kruger effect would be experts sort of underestimate their true capability while the novices overestimate. It's reversing. So those that really use AI technology quite often will amplify or overestimate what it's actually possible of achieving. And so we're seeing this sort of inversion of the Dunning-Kruger effect as a result of this cognitive offloading that happens with the technology. Um, in my specific subfields, even the companies that offer the technology as like one of their main selling products are facing a similar issue with the studies that they do to try and train people how to program or how to write code. If they use generative AI in that process, they kind of don't learn anything as a result, right? 2 grade points lower, we're seeing 17% drop in the sort of performance of these students in this quizzing setting. So the main mitigation factor here is to keep a focus on critical thinking skills when it comes to the education. And if it is not something specifically with the use of generative AI, try to keep many things unplugged in the sense that you don't have something with generative AI at the fingertips in order to do those activities. So how to respond to this sort of like sea of change and all of the issues that are coming here? There is now a realization that universities can turn AI from a threat to an opportunity by teaching the critical thinking skills. It's going to be absolutely essential when they're using generative AI that they maintain that element of critical thinking. This is a recent conversation piece that just went out, I think 2 days ago at this point, in what it is that we might teach differently or the new things that we should be putting on the critical path for students in our education programs. What should they be learning and how should we be assessing things slightly different in the era of GPT? The result for assessments here, if I had a crystal ball and I sort of saw where this was coming a little bit better, I would have invested in these blue book companies. For those who don't know, blue books are you write an exam, you sit down and you have to write a whole essay in the 3 hour span. They are not able to print these fast enough. There's a resurgence in factories that were about to shut down. We are now back to in-person assessments. And so, other than the slide remark that I wish I invested in it, I think collectively education systems should invest in the new reality that in-person assessments, if we are going to assess students, are going to be a real thing. And so double down on helping students understand how to quiz better, how to write exams better, the facilities that would be equipped to make that a reality, and so on. We're very fortunate at Queen's to have a very strong student accessibility services center that has students with key considerations able to write in the settings that help them succeed best. But I think this is now going to be an important part moving forward. One emerging opportunity would be bespoke study guides. And so this is something that I've personally found that I would not advise my students in my class go and create a system like this to explore. This is how to do search in an AI class at the 3rd year level. If they were to do this, what gets generated are things with subtle errors and issues, and it teaches them the wrong things given the course content that's there. They're not yet masters of this material. But what you're seeing on the screen is an interactive demo that was about a 40-minute conversation with me in an advanced model of Gemini, right? Me as the instructor, I can say, no, I didn't teach them that yet. I don't want you to put that in the demo. Or this, you have a bug over here. I need you to fix that. And this way of displaying the solution, this is what they're going to have to do on the quiz. So make it look like that, right? So I think this is a tremendous opportunity for instructors to create custom, bespoke, interactive things to teach the students better the material that you're trying to teach. One emerging setback, generative AI for curriculum design. Again, I would point back to WorkSlop is AI-generated content that looks good but lacks substance. I've witnessed this seriously gum up the wheels of higher education in my own institution. And really the big thing that it tackles or the big thing that it sort of brings about is now a lack of faith and trust among the colleagues that usually would have it, right? If you do not set those institutional norms about when it's okay and when it's not okay, then it just becomes this very fraught discussion of like, what have you given me? Do I need to double check this? Is it generative AI? Should I even look at it just creates this environment of mistrust in terms of how you're communicating collegially. So this is one setback that I've sort of seen locally. Ongoing policy discussions at Queen's. These are the things we're grappling with right now and might come up and back down as policy. Who is liable when a virtual tutor gets something wrong, right? And so if I, as an instructor, say, use this tutor to get ready for your midterm, and then it gets an answer wrong and the student has the receipts to prove it, would I, the instructor, be liable for advocating this to be something to study with? What expectations of disclosure or acknowledgement should be in place? If I generate something with generative AI, should I disclose that as an instructor? What about in administrative tasks and so on? Should students have the opportunity to opt out, right? And if they don't want to use on ethics grounds or whatever it might be of generative AI in a classroom, do they have the opportunity to say no and still succeed in that class? Where we are settling on this, I believe, at Queen's is for things like group work, if it's going to be mandated, it needs to be listed in the calendar. And so if generative AI use is going to be a mandatory part of a course, it may come about that you need to list that in the calendar description so students have advance notice. And what about staff and faculty vis-a-vis workload expectations? And so do I have the opportunity as an instructor to refuse the use of generative AI? And will I be penalized in terms of workload expectations, again, from the bargaining perspective of the unions for this? One activity I would leave you with to consider taking away is your own capability benchmark. And so the desiderata for this is to have a suite of tests that are meaningful to your expertise, crucially something that you are an expert in and you can assess, potentially, but not necessarily related to your job. And it's on the boundary of what generative AI can do. And then continually evolving with the improvements seen over time. So you can kind of see how the technology is improving things. I'll show some examples. This is one, courtesy of Simon Willison, that has a repeated question of draw me a pelican on a bicycle. And SVG is a language that is like circle here, line there type of deal. So can it understand enough what it's looking for to generate an SVG file that has a meaningful representation of a pelican on a bicycle? Another from Ethan Mullock is an otter on an airplane using Wi-Fi. So he would ask like twice a year, draw me this image, and you can see from 2022 all the way to 2025, the improvements over time for this particular task. How many R's in strawberries, a famous one that made the rounds, and the LLMs just simply couldn't get it early on, but eventually it caught on and we moved to a different capability benchmark. My own personal one in automated planning, again, I would ask it, compared to the planners that we have and the software that we've written for it, takes less than a second, not a lot of memory, comes up with a perfect plan. If you ask an LLM to do this, it will sit and think for nearly 3 minutes and it will give you something that's incorrect. It looks like it could be correct, but it's incorrect. And so this is my own personal capability benchmark that I will use time and time again. And so sort of to wrap, what's my advice with all of this? Stay skeptical. There's a lot of hype on either side of the spectrum. There's like very doomer perspectives and very rosy future perspectives, mainly from the companies selling the stuff. Stay skeptical of both sides of the spectrum. Stay informed. The capabilities really do change weekly. And if at some point you're holding on to an opinion that, yeah, but I can't do this, have you tried this in the last month or so, right? Because maybe now it can. They really are sort of a shifting base. And stay centered. And so let your context dictate your opinion, right? It is extremely good. We say it's a jagged form of intelligence where in certain areas it is very, very capable, but in other areas it's like a deep valley where it just can't do anything. So for your specific context, let that drive your opinion and the capabilities inside of there. And then the final piece worth a read here is from the conversation that AI is wreaking havoc on university, not just assessments, but here's how we should respond. And the general moral of this piece is that it is a wicked problem. This helped me a lot in my journey of trying to figure out what is happening with generative AI in higher ed. And it is a wicked problem by definition. It's coined by Riddle and Weber. It refers to problems that defy neat solutions. I really hope you didn't show up today to find a neat solution to this. There's no true or false answer. There's only better or worse ones and things that you can do to nudge it in the right direction. And the first step is to stop pretending that AI assessment is a simple, solvable problem. We just do this, and then it's all going to work out because there's always these weird edges that you just can't solve everything at once. AI and assessment must be treated as something to be continually negotiated rather than definitively resolved, right? It's an ongoing conversation. And this is why I try to update all of the recommended articles and podcasts and so on. It's an evolving understanding of what is happening here. And it's something that you have to continually stay on top of. It requires this continuous and open reflection and dialogue. So that's it for the slides. I think I only went over a few minutes. And the disclaimer on this one, no aspect of this talk was generated using generative AI, except for the commentary, 100% certified artisanal Professor Muse content, straight to you. So I don't know if we have access to stop the recording. I would invite all the questions that people would like to ask and have a wonderful discussion for the next sort of 24 minutes.